Writers Group of Washington, D.C. I welcome you to today's Zoom presentation by Amalia Balch. I met the author on our Facebook page a few months ago. She announced that she had just published her book, Lost Child of Greece, a true story about her journey to seek her Greek roots. Feeling intrigued, I read her book and I learned about what she went through and about the dark side of the adoption process in Greece. It is an inspirational story and I admire her courage in writing it. We are honored that she accepted our invitation to speak today. I'm also grateful for Andie Petrides, who will be moderating this event, and my son Andonis for the technical aspects. And now, without further ado, I ask Andie to lead the way.
Good evening, everyone. They say the world is a stage. Upon this stage walks a person with tremendous charisma and passion. It is my privilege to present to you Amalia Balch, who I find is a powerful inspiration and who will definitely leave a deep mark in our lives. Amalia Balch, who is better known as Amy, was adopted from Patras, Greece, at the age of 5 and raised by doting parents as an only child in a suburb of Los Angeles, California. Both her parents were school teachers. Her father, Henry Miller, a botanist, developed the horticulture and landscape gardening curriculum for the Montebello School District in Southern California, and which he taught at high school level. Amy's mother taught at the elementary level and later became the principal of a local private Christian school. Although baptized Greek Orthodox, Amy was not raised in the Orthodox Greek Christian church, but as a Protestant Christian. However, she never abandoned her Greek spiritual roots. Amy has spent her life devoted to her personal faith, which harmoniously interchanges with Greek Orthodoxy. Desiring to stay connected to all things Greek, Amy and her husband have visited a local Orthodox congregation, attended the annual Greek festivals, and have made periodic day trips to St. Anthony's Greek Orthodox Monastery in Florence, Arizona, where Amy finds harmony and comfort. In 1966, Amy met her husband, Richard, in high school. She was a sophomore, he a senior. They dated briefly during Amy's senior year, but soon parted ways. Enrolled in separate universities, both unexpectedly ran into each other when serendipitously attending the same college and, astonishingly, taking the same psychology class, marriage and the family. Their relationship was soon rekindled, and after 4 years of dating, they married in September of 1971. Amy has been married to her husband, whom she calls her true north, for 50 years, having celebrated their milestone Golden Jubilee in September. Due to her husband's employment as a civil engineer with 2 major oil companies, as well as working on the north slope of Alaska, Prudhoe Bay oil fields, for a private contractor, Amy has lived in 6 different states: California, Texas, Colorado, Alaska, Arizona, and Oregon, but has resided in Mesa, Arizona, a suburb of Phoenix, for the past 20 years. Although having lived in many areas, Amy states that she will always be a California girl at heart. Amy is the mother of 1 and grandmother of 2. However, no great-grandchildren yet, she laments. And pet parent to 4 rescue dogs. For the majority of Amy's adult life, she has been a homemaker by choice, although she has sporadically worked outside the home, principally in secretarial positions. Throughout Amy's life, extracurricular interests have been primarily with a faith-based, ministry-focused, volunteering in positions of leadership in both local and international ministries. Amy has had the pleasure of traveling extensively, both overseas and across the US, and has spoken in various women's groups and churches throughout the years. Though receiving an associate degree in secretarial sciences and intermittently employed in interim office positions while raising her son, Amy still felt unsettled about her steering course in life. A quote by J.R.R. Tolkien profoundly resonated with her. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Feeling God's gentle tug on her heart and sensing she was better suited to an organic application rather than pursuing the world of academia, Amy saw her pathway to higher education becoming chiefly focused towards grassroots leadership development. With several years dedicated to a hands-on training in both Christian ministry and mentorship by prominent local and national Christian leaders through seminars and conferences, along with many hours of concentrated individual training by chosen ministries, Amy regained her sense of direction and purpose. And soon, many doors of opportunity opened to her, none greater than having her course set on the path to finding her own roots, reuniting with her biological family, and discovering her true identity. Some of Amy's ministry involvements encompass
When it gives you something from the host,
assisted with a medical mission team in the interior of Haiti, involved for 7 years in prison ministry, Anchorage, Alaska, president of the American arm of the Athens and Patras branch of CSIP, SEASYP, a Greek search group, produced the Greek newsletter, Greek Jubilee, the newsletter of adoptees in motion for Greek adoptees pursuing their roots, to remain informed on pending or solved cases and connecting with each other for support. Frequent guest speaker for Greeks for Christ in Oakland, California, where she shared her adoption story and has spoken on other topics of faith as well. Worked with the organization of AGLOW, AGLOW, International, Women's Ministry, in various leadership positions for over 20 years. Also served as SW Region, Israel Mandate Advocate, Information and Prayer Coordinator for AGLOW International. Spoke for the Thessaloniki, Greece, AGLOW Women's Group. Employed as executive assistant and tour director for an evangelist with Trinity Broadcasting Network International Ministries, with a branch office and studios located in Denver, Colorado. Director of Women's Ministry at her local congregation, Word of Grace, Mesa, Arizona. Developed the modern program, Messianic AGLOW, for AGLOW International on a local campus, teaching on the Jewish roots to the Christian faith. Served briefly with Hospice of the Valley. There, what a beautiful life. Always aware of her adoption and unique Greek heritage, Amy describes her life in America as mostly wonderful. Yet, she was haunted by early childhood trauma. And she often thought, where did she come from? And who was she, really? The desire to know about her past life led Amy to pursue the truth eventually resulting in a dream come true reunion with her birth family. During this journey, searching for her true roots and reclaiming her past, Amy became involved with the Greek search group CSIP, acronym Association for the Investigation and the Uncovering of Evidence of Children Adopted Without the Consent of their Natural Parents. This was first formed in Thessaloniki and later encircled Athens and finally Patras for Greek adoptees. She co-founded and served as president of the American arm of the Patras branch in 1995 with her Patras counterpart. She was successful in helping reunite several adopted children and their natural families on both sides of the Atlantic, fulfilling a lifelong heart's desire to not only know the truth about her own past, but to do something meaningful for the beloved country of her birth. Amy considers this time to be one of life's most challenging yet rewarding endeavors. Although no longer actively working cases, Amy receives occasional calls from adoptees searching for family, who located her either on the CSIP adoption website or through other sources. Amy has been interviewed on local Greek TV channels, Sky, Mega, and by the Associated Press, New York Times, and other news agencies, with several articles posted, including the October 28, 1996 edition of People's Magazine. Amy's passions and hobbies include gourmet cooking, painting, both oils and acrylics, creating custom stained glass windows, panels, and various pieces for local artisans and fans of stained glass, decorating and beautifying both her home and yard, and keeping up with her 4 beloved fur babies. Amy has played the piano and the organ as both church pianist and organist for various churches. Amy now plays mainly for her own enjoyment. Carrying the long-held goal of writing a memoir always close to her heart, Amy's dream, with the help of contributor Elaine McAllister, was finally realized with the publication of her newly released first book, Lost Child of Greece, One Orphan's Incredible Journey Home. Amy's life is full, but she states that there's always room for one more life rescue, both human and canine, and hopefully one more book. Dear Amalia, with humble trust, I leave the floor, which is a screen today, to you. Please join me in welcoming Amalia to the screen.
Thank you, Andie, for your wonderful and very moving introduction. I just about didn't recognize myself. I wasn't sure who you were talking about. You did a wonderful introduction, and I thank you very much. And Patty, I thank you for inviting me to speak about my new book, Lost Child of Greece, which I'd like to show you now. And with the Hellenic Writers Group and anyone else who's joining us today. So thank you. It's so good to be with you today. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy to share a little about myself and my story, Lost Child of Greece. And I would like to show this again and tell you that this book is the symphony of my life. It's my life story, and it's one of survival, resilience, and redemption. I never dreamed that one day I would be talking to the Hellenic Writers Group of Washington, D.C. about a book I wrote, but here I am. Greece, of course, is where my story begins, so let's start at the beginning. At the close of World War II, and on the heels of the Greek Civil War, on Wednesday, September the 20th, 1950, under the sign of Virgo, a baby girl was born in the port city of Patras to an anxious and distraught 30-year-old unmarried village maiden, and abandoned shortly thereafter on December the 12th at 2 months and 2 weeks of age. Wednesday's child was full of woe. 66 years ago in 1955, through God's grace and mercy, this child was brought to this magnificent country as a 5-year-old war refugee through the act of adoption. Truth is, she was an illegitimate child, an abandoned orphan, and a shameful presence that needed societal expunging. A throwaway ragamuffin caught up in the black market baby selling scandal of post-Civil War Greece of the late 1940s through the 1970s. In spite of the dubious and less than proper circumstances of this baby girl's conception and shame-based birth, a poor village maiden nobly and courageously chose to give life to the baby she carried, yet would soon be forced to relinquish, although life would have been much kinder on her had she not. This decision ultimately cost her her life. Although this discarded daughter of Greece spent the next 5 years shuffled between an orphanage and a foster home before her adoption, at the ripe old age of 5, the pathway for her was always divinely set. Her destiny awaited for her in another land called America, and with 2 amazing people who wanted her and who would insanely love her. I was that baby girl. The first 5 years of my life before my adoption was a mystery. The information the orphanage had on file was minimal and sketchy, lacking any pertinent information about my birth mother or a death certificate for her, nor the official form releasing me for adoption. And on a chilly, overcast Saturday evening on October the 29th in 1955, a Flying Tigers airline flight filled with irritable babies and frightened children and weary chaperones departed Athens for America. I have a picture of a replica of that that's here at our local airport. I don't know, can you see that?
Yes, yes.
All right. So each orphan on that flight was given an opaque plastic bag that held extra underclothes, socks, and a toy. The bag was smaller than a carry-on, but for us, it was our carry-all our worldly possessions. And 66 years later, I still remember the smell of that plastic carry-on, which, by the way, I still have. After a long flight, our plane landed in this wonderful, wonderful place we children had been told about, called America. And this small orphan stepped for the first time on American soil on a balmy afternoon in New York City on October the 30th. It was a Sunday, the day I met my new parents. And here is the actual photo from the airport meet and greet for the adoptees and their new parents. The 3 of us spent the night with my new mother's aunt and uncle in Long Island. Then bright and early the next morning, our little family boarded a TWA flight for that famous shiny city, Los Angeles, California. The flight itself was mostly a blur, but after a few hours, I arrived at my new forever home. It was a Monday, and it was also Halloween, or All Hallows Eve. The American festival of Halloween, with its strange rituals, was at first a bit overwhelming for this frightened little girl straight from an orphanage in Greece. And who or what were trick-or-treaters? I just couldn't imagine. I thought America, my new home, was a very strange place. However, before long, I grew to love all American holidays, anything to do with candy, carnivals, dressing up in funny clothes, and Santa Claus and presents, and under the tree, and the Easter bunny bringing baskets of candied eggs was just fine with me. My American life was absolutely amazing. I had a fantastic childhood growing up in a wonderful home and was loved by extraordinary parents, which, but although America became my new home and my new place to call home, I now live so very, very far away from my true homeland, which often returned to me through the years in dreams and in fuzzy recall, fragmented snippets of sounds and images and of sketchy faces, appearing like phantoms in the night, reaching out, awakening my soul to another time and another place. And staying connected to Greece was now only done through pictures and maps my parents showed me. However, once an adult, I was no longer content looking only at maps and photos or reading books about my homeland, nor was I content living with a missing past. A restlessness churned within me, a latent yearning to return to my homeland intensified. 30 years after I arrived in America, shortly after my 35th birthday, a rush of peculiar feelings unexpectedly surfaced within me. That unseen umbilical cord that kept me tethered to Greece had not been severed, but was very much still attached and pulsating with life, gently tugging and pulling me emotionally back to the womb and to the genesis of my life, back to my homeland and to the voices and the blurred faces I recalled in hazy form. It was a rebirthing of sorts. From out of the hidden recesses of my anxious mind, suppressed memories began to resurge. As intense internal pressure from an unknown source grew, tilting my equilibrium about as far as it could go before it snapped. I knew something was being stirred, something was being rebirthed in me, something that would finally answer questions and confront and overcome traumas and anxieties stemming from birth. But what and how? One night, I had a very strange dream. I was at the beach, standing by the water's edge, when I suddenly noticed a baby was floating in the ocean. Realizing I needed to rescue this baby, I quickly stepped into the water and lifted the child out. And when I did, my dream immediately ended. As I awakened from the dream, I instinctively knew I was that baby. The dream's meaning became crystal clear. The baby in the water represented a birthing process, and the internal pressure that had been building represented birth pains, signaling that a birthing time had come. From this, I knew that the time had arrived for me to make my way back across the ocean to where my life began, to the place I was born. It was now time to begin seeking my roots and reclaiming my lost past. But I wasn't sure how or where to even start. The way back to my homeland was long and emotionally exhausting, a journey filled with many obstacles, frustrations, and challenges, which I share about more in my book. It was a pilgrimage that would eventually take me back to where I was born, back to Patras, back to the pain of loss, back to the orphanage, where after 2 months of life, I had been baptized and given the name Amalia by my godfather, whose family I also met, and back to my foster home, and back to some of the phantoms of my dreams. And even more remarkably, that longed for yet seemingly impossible dream, which was only achievable in my fantasies, became reality. The miracle of finding my roots and reuniting with my biological family. The day I discovered my real Greek identity. Yet as excited as I was for the road to be unraveled and to be finally back home and reuniting with people from my past life, I was unprepared for the sudden powerful feelings of alienation and loss that these visits surprisingly produced. I felt like an xenos, an outsider in my own homeland, who no longer spoke or understood her mother tongue, so critical to my Greek identity, which only intensified my feelings of loss and estrangement. Was Greece home any longer? Would I be accepted by my family of origin as one of them? Or was this a bridge too far to cross? My mind reeled with many questions and fears as I made my way back to a people who remained strangers, yet familiar strangers. But on a glorious June day in 1996, when that long-awaited homecoming finally arrived, I was enthusiastically embraced in their loving arms. All fears of not truly belonging to the blurry silhouettes in my dreams was fully erased. And I would like to show you now my members of my biological family. This is during a reunion. The lost child of Greece was finally home. Nevertheless, the way back to them had been a mighty rocky road. And let me explain. 1 year earlier, during our 5th research trip to Greece, on what was a postcard picture-perfect Grecian day in May of 1995, I found myself, along with hundreds of shaken and upset Greeks, stunned by hearing the unbelievable news that was raging like wildfire through the national media about Greece's lost children. Where it was believed hundreds of Greek babies were allegedly trafficked and illegally adopted, sold internationally, predominantly to American couples paying hefty fees for a child. And even more shocking was the realization that my own adoption might also have been part of Greece's black market baby selling scam. The scandalous news that at least 3,200 Greek children, that's 3,200, and the actual number probably much higher, were adopted by American families in the 1950s without their natural parents' permission. And this was constantly being reported through the media and daily aired on TV programs such as Nickelodeon's Post to Tunnel, Light in the Tunnel, which is like America's Most Wanted, and it was being broadcasted daily on Alpha TV. All of Greece held its collective breath and were riveted to their television sets, sending shockwaves throughout the nation. Clandestinely, a steady stream of Greek infants had been going to America, with adoptive couples paying as much as $4,000 per child. And in 1950 US dollars, that is equivalent today to $25,000 to $30,000. Imagine. Angry Hellenic parents who had always suspicioned corruption was involved in their mysterious child's disappearance turned hysterical in their frantic search for their missing sons or daughters, with many appearing also on Nickelodeon show, sharing their stories and pleading for help to find their stolen children. Greek American adoptees anxiously seeking their biological families and who were able to finance a trip over were also interviewed by the media. And their stories were often showcased on TV programs as well, with each showing baby pictures they had held on to for years. Confusion reigned. As rage and outrage grew, passions ran unbridled. I spent the next 2 years trying to unravel the scandalous black market baby selling activity that allegedly had transpired during Greece's dark days, in hopes of finding the facts about my own adoption. My anxious mind screamed at me with clashing thoughts. I had to know, was my adoption actually illegal? Surely my parents were not aware of this trafficking of children, and I shuddered to think this was likely. Excited families eager to adopt Greece's war-damaged and orphaned children did so completely unaware of the cunning black market baby selling activities they and their beloved child may have been possibly linked to. Mine certainly were not aware of the international explanation. As I got closer to answers in my own search, the resistance got more intense. Tight-lipped officials gave even more pushback during the extremely baffling and challenging years spent in trying to break the code of silence in Greece regarding these alleged illegal adoptions. What was finally uncovered was that all too frequently, impoverished and naive mothers who had just given birth were told by doctors and nurses, and sometimes even priests, that their baby had died. But they were provided no body nor a death certificate. And parents who needed extra assistance and support and had placed the child in an orphanage only temporarily, when later going back to retrieve their son or daughter would be told that their child had died and be given a fake death certificate. Other times, adoptive parents would be given false documents saying that a child's natural mother had died, paving the way, of course, for an adoption. There are conflicting accounts as to how long my natural mother, Maria, lived after my birth. Some reports state it was merely a year. Some family members claim she lived for 2 to 4 years. And regardless of the fact, I will be eternally grateful she was willing to give me life. My adoptive parents unquestionably accepted what was recorded in my adoption file. To them, my biological mother had died a year after my birth at age 31. Decades ago, such authority was not questioned on either side of the ocean. But now, the shameful truth had been finally exposed, and Pandora's box, as a result of the shenanigans and weaknesses and evils of humans, had been forcibly opened, and snakes of deceit were slithering out. A nation's collective trauma of a dark past must now ultimately be dealt with, and the sins committed against the innocent babies and the parents who lost them broken so healing could start. While no one knows how many children may have been adopted through falsified records, hundreds, if not thousands, of Greek babies were flying to America as fast as the Orphan planes could make the long transatlantic flight, including this 5-year-old child. Ships also carried this precious cargo. The single Greek ship, the Queen Frederica, sailed for America in 1954 with 1,400 orphans on board. More would follow. During this challenging time seeking answers, I became part of the Greek Search Group, CSEP, helping adoptees and birth families search for lost families. And then I formed the U.S. branch, serving as president. We faced lies, denials, threats, anger, and worse, as we worked at exposing what appeared to be a widespread cover-up. But with determination and God's help, truth was finally exposed, and many families were joyfully reunited. No matter the obstacles faced and the personal threat hurled at me, this became one of the most rewarding events of my life, because separation from home and family is a traumatic and tragic experience. I am tremendously thankful for families that were reconnected and overjoyed for broken hearts that found home. I was reunited with my biological family 1 year after the baby selling scandal broke out. Now, I want to back up just a little and talk about my amazing adoptive parents and about the incredible home I grew up in. And as you heard from Andie's amazing introduction, my parents were school teachers, and they were both in their late 40s when they adopted me, which in itself was a little unusual. My father taught botany at the junior high level, and then, as was just explained, he developed the handbook for the curriculum, horticulture and landscape gardening, and taught that for the next 25 years at the high school level. My mother, who loved children, yet raised only one, me, was an elementary teacher before I joined the family. When they adopted me, my mom set teaching aside, not returning until after I entered high school, at which point she then accepted the position of principal for a private school. Mom played the piano for Sunday school, and she made sure I learned to play also. My American home was a utopia for me. I especially enjoyed our backyard, where Dad's love for horticulture and landscaping was plainly displayed, and where a variety of orchids, camellias, roses, and numerous citrus and fruit trees grew. Our property was bursting with luscious fig, pomegranates, apricot, loquat, kumquat, avocado, and lemon trees, making for a delicious paradise for this little orphan from Greece to enjoy and play in. And can you imagine what is growing in the backyard of our Arizona home? Yes, fig, pomegranate, apricot, lemon, orange, grapefruit, and apple trees. After all, I am my father's daughter. Some of my best memories of childhood are of Dad supervising and decorating many beautiful floats each year for the Pasadena Rose Parade, which he had the privilege of overseeing for more than 25 years. My parents loved me insanely, and I felt secure and cherished by them. I was the center of their hearts and universe. And I have so many wonderful, precious memories of my parents and countless extraordinary experiences with numerous church and community activities that they were involved in, and a litany that I do not have time to expound on. They became my heroes the first moment held in their arms. I simply adored them. I am who I am because of the legacy they left, their silver and gold reputations, their unshakable Christian faith based upon God's word, the Bible, their love for the Savior of all humanity, and the unconditional love they had for me, ultimately influencing and defining the person I have become. And faith is very important to me. I believe in many personal encounters in a miracle working God, which I share about and a few examples of in my book. Amazing miracles that brought a 5-year-old Greek orphan all the way from her war-torn homeland to the promised land of milk and honey, to streets made of gold and all the chocolate she could eat, to that shining city on a hill called America. And all I can tell you is from the unusual encounters that bordered on the miraculous as I was growing up and walking on my own road to healing from painful memories, someone was praying. Through all these life experiences, a base was being laid that someday would be expressed in a book. And I've often been asked how I became interested in writing and what motivated me to write a memoir. Well, I can assure you I never, ever dreamed I would write a book one day. So this question provoked some deep contemplation. But after some reflection, I arrived at the answer, which I really believe is also key stimulus for most writers. There are 5 little words: inspiration, illumination, passion, calling, and joy. As far back as I can remember, from the time of my adoption, my dad was always at his desk typing on his huge black war surplus Underwood upright typewriter. I fondly remember sitting on Dad's lap, striking the keys, and I soon learned to type on that ginormous typewriter. And even after all these years, I can still recall the clank of the keys and the sound of the bell. Wonderful memories, and I still have that typewriter. Just wind a ribbon on the carriage spool, and the old girl works the same, unlike me at age 71. But anyway, it was with great fascination I observed Dad's love for expressing himself in written form. My mother's writing focus leaned more towards poetic. And come to think of it, I don't believe she ever used the typewriter, preferring to compose her letters or poems, which I still have a precious few of, in longhand. Maybe that was because Dad and I often dominated the typewriter. Who knows? As a principal private school, Mom often produced plays. So as a result, my love for writing and drama, like tiny seeds planted in a rich soil and carefully cultivated, soon blossomed from my parents' example and created inspiration. Later in life, my father's long-held dream of writing his memoir was eventually realized, and I was so proud of him, but extremely happy also to have a recorded history of his side of the family, as I did my mother's. And the older I became, the more aware and appreciative I was of the importance of recorded family lineage, not only for myself, but for posterity, which ultimately, consciously or subconsciously, inspired me to someday follow in their footsteps in writing my own memoir. But little could I have imagined then what would, in fact, one day propel me to write one. As a young girl, I loved writing for the sheer joy of taking whatever thought came to mind and just running with it without constraint. I could explore the depth of my soul and write with wondrous abandon words that I couldn't always comfortably express. It was cathartic for me then, and it's still cathartic today. And sitting at my computer even now, creatively writing and expressing whatever idea comes to mind is soothing and enjoyable. Sometimes I keep, sometimes I delete, and sometimes I post on Facebook. You'll always know the mood I'm in by what I write. In due course, after becoming involved with local and international church ministry and other various faith-based organizations, opportunities occurred for me to advance my creative writing skills through speech writing and public speaking and producing holiday programs, which I love doing. These few snippets from my background influenced my developing a love for expressing myself through prose. But now I want to return to my Greek saga and explain what persuaded me to write a book. My journey searching for my roots developed into a 10-year Greek odyssey, one that became a journey of self-discovery. The many research trips I took to Greece and the compilation of notebooks containing numerous newspaper articles and photos and extracts of various interviews, along with extensive material I acquired on the history of the Greek war years and the baby selling black market scandal, ultimately crafted the early basis for my book. During the years of researching and discovering my roots and searching for answers, family and friends who knew my story continued to encourage me. Tell your adoption story, they said. People need to hear it. Although family and friends continually prodded and encouraged me to share my story, I wasn't sure exactly how to begin, but I felt compelled to just the same. Words are powerful, yet sometimes inadequate tools to tell one's story. And writing Lost Child of Greece has been a difficult project, mainly because of the powerful emotions provoked. My book has taken many twists and turns, like rotations of a kaleidoscope, and has endured several rewrites since its inception more than 10 years ago. And I also believe I simply needed time to discover who I really am and uncover more missing pieces to my story. And although I set writing aside for a time whenever the stress of writing became too much, my research trips to Greece continued, and the desire to tell my story also continued to grow, as if something or someone was pulling on my psyche. During my research trips to Greece, I was interviewed by various American and Greek journalists and featured on a couple to 3 different TV programs. I was fortunate enough to correspond for a while with Nicholas Gage, a former investigative reporter and foreign correspondent for the New York Times and author of the book Hellenic, who was himself also a political war refugee. Mr. Gage kindly volunteered to search on my behalf for my birth mother through the Red Cross. Through our brief correspondence, I was learning even more vital facts about the dark days of Greece as Mr. Gage passed on very important pieces of information to me from his own experiences. And after speaking with many adoptees here in the States, as well as meeting many distraught families in both Athens and Patras who had lost children to America and other countries, I realized that these were extraordinary, life-changing moments, ones I had to write about and share their stories as well as my own. As I sat at my computer and rolled up my sleeves, I soon faced with one of the greatest personal challenges yet to deal with, and as it pertained to sharing my story. I wanted to be simplistically and straightforwardly truthful and transparent in sharing at such gut-level intimacy about my personal experiences and the pain. But it was a risk. And my willingness to take that risk and share so candidly the struggles I talk about in my book was in the hope that by doing so, my story might help and encourage someone else scarred by abuse and neglect, particularly as a child. I wanted to be real, but wasn't sure how much to tell. Knowing how greatly I suffered for years, emotionally battling an invisible enemy and pushing down my feelings like a beach ball being held underwater, denying to myself how I really felt, unable to articulate or not feeling safe to do so. Yet, I also realized what happens when that beach ball of repressed memory forcefully resurfaces. And I felt it important to convey that, what perhaps others could or would not admit to, even at the risk of being misunderstood or dismissed. You know, buried pain and grief with its long-term emotional and often physical impact became the lens through which I saw the world and which subconsciously influenced every aspect of my life and all my relationships. As I know it has others who've gone through similar trauma, especially during occurring during the tender formative years. I realize I'm not the only one who suffered trauma, as I've defined in my book, some much more severe than I. But some still couldn't speak about it or feel comfortable doing so. However, today, more than ever before, people are publicly speaking out more, boldly telling their stories of abuse, making talking about mine timely. Although trauma experience for some of us happened decades ago, it remains with us as if it happened just yesterday. Time does not heal all things. Painful memories are always subconsciously impacting our life in one way or another, forming the lens from which we see and view life from. We simply have to deal with the often hidden silent hurt and repressed anger for our sanity's sake and our emotional, spiritual well-being. And it can be extremely difficult opening our souls to others because we don't know how it will be received, and it is a risk. It's like handing our heart over to a stranger, unsure of how it will be held and treated. Yet, I've learned that giving away pain is also a gift. It trusts those receiving it to not deepen or add to it, but to accept it and allow the change and opening of the heart to take place. And if handled correctly, it can open our hearts to the healing grace God offers. Because of this, I was willing to take the risk of being very candid in recounting the level of emotions I experienced and in revealing how repressed memories manifested in my life, in the hope that it would be beneficial to others who suffered from abuse, to encourage them that there is a pathway to healing from painful memories, just as I had found. And there's another reason why it took so long to tell my story. It just simply took years for me to be emotionally strong and willing to sort out painful issues and be able to be open and honest. And you know what? It's still difficult for me at times to talk about. Additionally, a tremendous amount of research went into making my book as accurate as possible. And because of that, thousands of hours were spent at my computer writing this memoir. And even after serendipitously finding a kindred soul and multi-genre writer, Elaine McAllister, who contributed in helping to organize and polish my story, I still rewrote it another 4 times in the past 2 years before I felt I was ready and prepared to share it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, each of us has a story to share, and it's important that we do. Others have written captivating adoption stories more eloquently than I, but I wanted to focus my storyline a little differently than some by forming a historical foundation of both ancient and modern Greece, relating the impact of the times in order to give the reader a clearer understanding as to what precipitated the wholesale of flesh and blood of innocent children, specifically during the terrible Civil War years. I wanted a reading audience possibly not familiar with Greek history to better understand Greek culture, the mindset, and the battles, fears, and challenges of Hellenics daily struggling for survival through the unfathomable brutalities of multiple wars and the destructive lifetime devastating impact it had on innocent children. It took a great amount of time for me to grasp the weaknesses of a Greek society during the Civil War years, the suspicions and fears and vulnerability of a war-battered people, of cultural male pride, family honor, and a sealed lips over family secrets, of marginalized females and victimized children. It also took exercising my own demons and working through dark moments that hit me like a ton of bricks, from buried trauma and painful memories that often resurfaced whenever I tried writing. And it took maturing from Greek romanticism and an idealized images and fantasies of Greece I had created during my childhood in America, to having an accurate, eyes wide open understanding of the land of my birth, the times, the people, and my birth mother, seeing her through the eyes of an adult and uncovering her world through the eyes of those who controlled her, reaching out to somehow communicate with her across a chasm of death. And I believe I did. And you know what? More importantly, it took coming to a place of forgiveness. To be able to acknowledge the power of the past, forgive and transcend it, rather than remaining a wounded, bleeding dove, constantly seeing the world through the murky lens of anger and rejection, but rather through eyes of compassion, mercy, and grace. In other words, as an ancient Athenian oath states, to remember the past without rancor. In the book of Ecclesiastes, the book of wisdom, King David's son Solomon states, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. The time to tell my story had arrived. It was the right time. It was my Kairos time. So to try and encapsulate why it took me so long to finally write Lost Child of Grief, it's because it took both a Chronos time and a deep time. It was God's timing for me. You know, every writer has an objective for writing a particular story. When I first started writing my memoir, I did so primarily for myself, to have a detailed history about my adoption and search for roots in my journey of discovery. I wanted to talk about the trafficking of children by profiteers of flesh and blood and of the illegal adoptions that my own adoption may also have been tainted by. But I also wrote for my son's benefit. I wanted him to better understand his Greek mother and the passion and drive I had in finding my Greek roots, in order that he might feel a stronger connection to his own unique Hellenic heritage that he's intertwined with, left to him by his Greek Yaya, who remains a beautiful enigma to both of us. I felt it important to also honor the discarded and war-damaged and orphaned children that didn't survive, so that their little voices, silenced by the struggles and misfortunes of the past, may be heard and their short life honored. You know, when you play with the life, you do a terrible wrong. My heart's motivation in telling my story was to bring inspiration and hope and encouragement to those profoundly wounded by any form of abuse, whether physically, emotionally, or spiritually, which I suppose largely is probably all of us. Some are just better at hiding their brokenness. As I continued writing, it soon became obvious that there was another purpose for writing, one that had been obscure, but was now crystal clear. The duty I felt to restore the honor and dignity to my birth mother, Maria, which she deserved, her name, her reputation, which she was cruelly cheated out of receiving. Because I was learning a different truth about her, I didn't want her character to be always recalled as being morally flawed. I needed to change the narrative of her on her life by immortalizing her integrity, her simplicity, and her goodness. For surely, as the saying goes, the good do die young, or so it sometimes seems. Perhaps God is just lovingly sparing them from greater evils to come. Broken genetics and broken lives, yet God sees and places tremendous value in every person, even an obscure maiden hidden away in the shadows of shame, lost to the passage of time. The more I learned about the strict moral culture and ethos of the time, I found it virtually incomprehensible that my birth mother, who like most village women was illiterate, who put on the kerchief like every other village girl at the age of 11, and from that moment never ever dared to speak to a man until the day she was to be handed over in marriage to a husband she didn't even know, would suddenly become a tainted village girl who had broken the village codes and traditions and shamed her entire family by having a scandalous affair and becoming pregnant with a village basket weaver, of all people? Was this the same young woman who was heard singing to her beloved animals and bitterly crying over them whenever one died? Madame Maria worked like many young girls as a domestic in a nearby village for what was considered a wealthy businessman who owned a general store. It was not uncommon for females working in a household of financially prosperous to be overpowered and taken advantage of by their male employers, or raped because of a gender-based political violence that was enacted against women during the 1946 to 1974 period in Greece, because of their family's leftist, communist, or perceived as such political affiliation and beliefs. Given that females were dominated by and the property of men, and considering the political frenzy of the times, along with the vicious reprisals towards women, in a culture where honor is beyond price or measure and a woman has no greater treasure, this is not a stretch. It soon struck me that these awful accusative words hurled against Maria came from the same source that had coldly looked into my eyes and callously told me that I looked like my birth father. Really? Well, how did he know? Why was that? Well, because it was explained to me without emotion that my birth mother was not attractive. Well, that's odd, since I was repeatedly told by people in her village who loved her that I am her mirror image. How could this person have the chutzpah to so heartlessly say this to me, while at the same time keeping his lips tightly sealed against giving me any information regarding my mother? Not even a picture of her, nor would he reveal the identity of my biological father, which he obviously knew, bringing another wound to my heart. The adage is true. Grief always wounds you. This tactless relative not only rudely insulted my mother, but also inflicted more hurt upon me. And I vowed to expunge his spiteful remarks off both of us. After learning this and more about Maria's character, I felt I had the unequivocal obligation to right this terrible injustice committed against her, no matter the agent, to keep Maria's memory from remaining sullied or being erased. You know, the bridge between the land of the living and the land of the dead is love. And even if no one ever reads these words of loyalty and dedication to her in the celestial books of life, they will be recorded. The daughter Madame Maria never knew knows the truth. And though she may never know my name, God does. And now Maria does too. You know, not having known my birth father, I am thankful to my heavenly Father of the fatherless for being so good to me. His mercy and amazing grace rewrote my life. And I thank God for my heritage and the Greek blood that runs through my veins. Though Greece will always have a huge hold on my heart and my endless devotion, I'm enormously thankful for the incredible privilege and joy of living in this wonderful country. When I returned to my homeland as an adult and stepped on Hellenic shores for the very first time, I did not feel like a grown woman returning, but more like a small child, lost, that I had remained inside, a child who had been grieving a very long time for her lost past, her mother, and her homeland. Well, this child finally found home and her lost identity in the center of God's heart. And now I am an old woman, at least that's what my mirror mockingly declares. But in some mysterious way, this old woman is still Elada's child. And I have a little short letter I want to read, but before I do, it's from an adoptee, and it explains why intently why I wrote my book. But I want to close by stating that without my husband's loving, faithful, and unwavering support, and the drive and enthusiasm he had to make our many trips to Greece, I may not have ever found my roots or authored a book, which he encouraged me to do. My true north, my husband, came into my life for such a time as this. So I'd like to now, real quickly in closing, just read this letter from another adoptee that was sent to me a few years back. And here Amalia, she starts out saying, first and foremost, I wish to apologize again for becoming so overwhelmed with our conversation. I have such deep gratitude towards you for confirming all that I have remembered, but could not legally verify regarding the circumstances of my life in Greece, the orphanage, the trauma I endured from a not so noble adoptive family so long ago, and yet so fresh in my mind as if it happened recently. Even therapy could not help to mitigate the memory of grief, the orphanage, the children, the bread, the fish, the traveling small circus, the ride on the flatbed truck me and another girl named Maria were on to be taken to a bus, which we had never seen, taken to Athens for the departure flight. I recall vividly seeing the Acropolis and listening to the music in a cafe below a hill from a house we stayed in temporarily before we left. It was a Greek couple The wife was pudgy, the husband was lean, and they had a daughter who danced ballet in front of a mirror, which we had never seen. We had no idea we were seeing our reflections for the first time. We were dressed in red shorts and a light blue striped shirt, and both of us carried a small red suitcase, which, by the way, was empty. I recall landing in New York and being frightened by the tall buildings which blocked out the sun. I remember my adoptive mother coming up to us and told the adults holding our hands, "That one," pointing to me, and I was led away from Maria to be taken aboard an excursion flight to Silver Springs, Maryland. I was so terrified at being separated from Maria that I literally stopped the flight, running up and down the aisle, screaming for Maria until a Greek man grabbed me and said in Greek, "Don't cry, you're a good little girl." I calmed down due to his familiar language, but they had to pry my hands tightly from around his tie as I slept on his lap. Now, at the age of 58, I have a flood of repressed memories surfacing and haunting my psyche. I apologize for giving you so much information all at once. I scanned all of the original documents and sent you photos of myself and my birth mother. Thank you for hearing my story, the never-ending story. I seek no reparations, no vengeance. I just want to know who my family is. And this is another powerful example of why I was motivated to write my book. So a very special thank you again to you, Patty, and you, Andie, for graciously inviting me and for the delightful opportunity to share today about myself and for my book, Lost Child of Grief. It's been both a pleasure and a joy. So it's us if they're so peripoli. I thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you so much.